Perfect. What's up?
Hi, Fee.
Hey, good to see you, Lauren.
Likewise, likewise.
So, we are here today to talk about Chinese medicine and the emotions. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So, I'll do a little intro. This is Lauren Steitler. He is a teacher at my school at Yosan University in Culver City here in Los Angeles. He has been studying Mandarin and traveling and learning from teachers to get like the deeper insight of Chinese medicine outside of school. So I'm really, really happy and excited to be having you here because you went through the same journey as I did, becoming a Chinese medicine, practitioner traditionally through the students way of looking at things. So I would love to hear your perspective of what you learned in school and outside of school.
Sure. This might be sacrilegious, but when I was in school, I felt like I remember the first patient I was sitting in front of in the clinic, and I'm asking all these questions and I'm getting all these no answers, and suddenly I realize like I don't know what to do for this person. Like I don't understand what's happening here. All the knowledge, all the studying that I did prior did not prepare me for my very first patient, which was like embarrassing. And so, so that pushed me in, well, that put me kind of at the edge of like, or like at a crossroads. And in my experience, for most people, the crossroads goes like this. You can either go like the functional medicine routes, like you go, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, so let's do everything like let's do science and evidence-based medicine, let's
Mhm.
do micronutrients, let's do diet, let's do this, and everything literature and peer reviewed and whatnot, and that's cool. That's what I think I think the majority of people will do. Some people within that then will also go to like new age medicine, like Reiki and crystals and all that, because they're looking for something that works, something that's
Mhm.
whatever they know, what they got, what they were taught, what is not working for them. So
Mhm.
they look outside. The last group, this very small group, which is the group that I'm part of, is like, wait, no, but this is what I wanted to study. Like, how do I make this work? And so for me, that drove me into looking at all the old books. Because the cool thing about Chinese medicine is that as it's really old,
Mhm.
there are lots of old books that were written by brilliant people who were facing down really serious illnesses, more serious than most of the illnesses that the average Chinese medicine practitioner will face today. So
Mhm.
I figured, well, I mean, if they could, with some degree of efficacy, treat the scary things they're writing about, then maybe I should be trying to learn what they were doing. And that started me on a long journey of looking for teachers who know how to practice that way, who can point into the books and the lines in the books to substantiate why they're using herbs the way they are or why they're using acupuncture the way they are. And also to like improve upon my ability to read old Chinese so that I can actually go into the books and see what they're saying themselves or myself. And the interesting thing is when you start doing that, you start realizing that the literature out there today that is supposed to be the standard Chinese medicine literature is inconsistent with like the most important books that were ever written in the history of our medicine. And then you go, oh dear.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got started becoming like a Chinese medicine super nerd.
Okay. I love it. So, can you tell us a little bit about how Chinese medicine looks at our emotions in general? Because it's
Yeah.
very different from the Western side, correct?
Well, you know what? I would actually say it's much closer to the Western side than most people would think.
Hmm.
And that's because, at least if we look at the really old literature, I spend most of my time reading the Han Dynasty literature, which is basically like the source material for all of Chinese medicine. And
Hmm.
there's Chinese medicine literature that spans much longer than that, or much that spans, or that was more recent than that. But like all the old doctors that we remember today, that we said were the best doctors, they all say, go read the Neijing, go read the Nanjing. So I read those books.
Hmm.
And in the Neijing in particular, there's a line that says, Earth has four seasons and five phases,
Hmm.
and the humans have 5 organs, and
Mhm.
these 5 organs transform the 5 chi, and this produces fear, sorrow, rage, joy, and and worry.
Mhm.
And so this line is very, very bluntly saying that your body produces your emotions, your organs produce your emotions. And I think that's pretty interesting. We today we would probably say emotions are much more of like a neurological thing. Like it happens probably first here and then kind of goes out this way. Maybe I don't practice Western medicine, so I'm not an expert in Western medicine concepts. But for the Chinese, they were well aware that emotions occur in a like with physical symptoms.
Mhm.
The reason we dislike certain emotions is because they literally hurt. They
Mhm.
hurt. We don't want to hurt, so we don't like being angry, or we don't want to hurt, we don't want to be sad. And conversely, the reason why we love being happy, for instance, is because it feels really good. And so we then pursue happiness because that's what we want.
Mhm.
So the Chinese were like, well, clearly each of these emotions, and they outline anywhere between 5 and 7 emotions. But these emotions predictably affect your body, or they affect your body in predictable ways, I should say, and that they have various affinities for different organs.
Mhm.
And as such, because certain emotions will affect certain organ systems, they then just concluded that, oh, well, maybe it's because that organ produces that emotion. Whether or not that is true,
Mhm.
because that may be ostensibly true, but whether or not it's true, there is a direct relationship
Mhm.
between emotions and our organs. And I don't think it's a far-fetched idea because our organs are the powerhouses of our body. If our organs don't work, we die. Like they are our body, they are us. Our organs are us. So the proper functioning of your organs, all of your organs, is going to contribute to your mental state just as much as your brain functioning properly is going to contribute to your mental state. The Chinese just put less importance on the brain and put more importance on your heart and your lungs and your liver instead. But why I think this is cool is because instead of saying that emotions are some separate entity that's happening on some other level,
Mhm.
and then having to try to explain how
Mhm.
this like trans-dimensional experience could be affecting you on a very three-dimensional like physical level, they're saying no, your emotions are a product of your organs, which
Mhm.
means that judging by what's happening in somebody's emotional state, you can get an idea of whether or not that person is healthy.
Mhm.
So Chinese medicine, they knew that they needed to know what was going on inside, but they didn't have X-rays, they didn't have CT scans, they didn't have um, ultrasound, they didn't have ways of looking inside. So everything had to be by proxy. They had to make the assumption that, well, what's happening on the gross level that I can see with my naked eye must be a byproduct of what's going on internally without which I can't see.
Right.
So I can see when you're angry or when you're happy. Therefore, I'm going to use that external or that representation, gross representation of your behavior as a means of gauging what's going on internally for you. So if somebody has very robust or forceful emotions, very strong emotions, if they have very chaotic emotions that are fluctuating all the time, or they have very protracted and enduring emotions,
Mhm.
all of these are telling the early Chinese doctors this person's body isn't working right. And
Mhm.
they're pointing to the direction of where they're ill in their body.
Mhm. Now, when I learned this, it really blew my mind and like lit a light bulb inside of me because I always wondered how our emotions affected our physical form. And, we're taught, oh, well, my stomach hurt because I was sad or because I have gastric you know, gastric issues. Well, how do we know that one didn't start before the other? You know, how do we know that it wasn't just the stomach, that it was actually your excessive worrying that really caused the gut issue? So when I learned this in school, it just really blew my mind, and it made me realize that this knowledge is so important to know. If I knew the connections between my organs and my emotions from a very early age, then I feel like I would have had a better grasp on my emotions and just been more aware in general. So you mentioned the five emotions and sometimes the seven emotions in different texts, right? So can you go through those emotions and what organs they're associated with?
Sure. So the mating will say that e- each of the five primary emotions are going to be produced by an organ. They're going to say rage is produced by the liver. They're going to say joy is produced by the heart. They'll say worry is produced by the spleen. Grief or sorrow is produced by the lungs. And fright is produced by the kidneys. Now, I think what's important to note here is that whether or not they are actually produced by, like, whether or not we could one day, you know, dissect a body and say, oh, yep, there's the sorrow right there in the lungs. I don't think that's really relevant here. I think what's relevant is the relationship, or the concurrent physical symptoms that the person will experience when they are experiencing that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so why I think this is important too is because in Chinese medicine, our primary means of treating patients uh, is our acupuncture and herbs.
Mm-hmm.
Both of these are physical medicine. Acupuncture is manual medicine where we're actually putting our hands on somebody, we're manipulating their soft tissue, like their muscles. And with herbs, we're giving them chemical substances that have to go, you know, into their stomach, absorbed into their bloodstream, and therefore goes around to their organs. So asserting that the emotions have a strong relationship to your organs suggests then that physical interventions such as acupuncture or herbs can affect your emotions. That, like, you're not limited to talk therapy alone.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, or like talk therapy and meditation, for instance, like the psychological sphere or something.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, consistent with Western medicine because look, some of the most prolific selling drugs are antidepressants.
Mm-hmm.
And these are chemicals, these are physical substances that will affect your brain chemistry. So presumably there were a number of substances that traditional cult like traditional cultures had already identified that had noticeable or marked effects on somebody's mood, and therefore they prescribed them. They came up with their own model to explain how and why that worked. And that model might not be consistent with the scientific model today, but it does not deny that the substances don't work, or that the substances work. So recognizing that these emotions are physical entities that are functions of your organs tells us that we can actually do something for them. It also says that if the concurrent physical symptoms that you might be feeling with your emotions, if they don't go away, like if those knots in your stomach don't go away, or that tight jaw doesn't go away, then it's going to be increasingly difficult to get the emotion to change. Because for the Chinese, the emotion is just a psychological expression of your organ function. It's telling the Chinese your organs aren't working, fix the organ, the emotions will get better. And that's why then so many people who don't address any of those people they put on antidepressants and they're on them for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the antidepressants, although they are effective at curtailing somebody's emotions, but flattening their emotional experience. They don't dip too low or raise too high. They don't address any of the physiological or metabolic problems that are contributing to the emotion in the first place.
Right. That was one of my favorite things to learn in school, is that our diet has so much to do with our mental health. Because in TCM, you know, if you have a propensity of not changing your food through and transforming your food, then you're going to have excess fluid in your body. That's going to affect your mind, because the spleen is also our will. And so when we experience the foods that aren't helping our physical bodies, then that has a direct correlation on our emotions. And that's direct correlation to the mental health crisis that we see today. Because like you said, when we have people coming in with anxiety or maybe more major depression or mania, we don't really talk about their diet, their nutrition, their lifestyle so much. They're given pills and medications, like you said, that are kind of just dampening down their experience. And so I think this is so powerful because, yes, like Kylie said, food is medicine. And I love that this medicine, Chinese medicine, really correlates everything. It's a holistic view. So when people come in to see us and they say, well, I'm having a lot of anxiety and I'm having a lot of loose stools and I'm having a headache, a migraine. Like, to us, those are completely different ways of looking at their body, and we can really help them on a more wide view than other doctors sometimes. And so that's why I'm so appreciative of this medicine. One thing that I wanted to talk about, because it can be confusing when we say that these emotions come from this organ. So if someone is having a lot of anger and we say, oh man, you're having what we call liver qi stagnation. And they're like, oh my God, is something wrong with my liver? What do you say to those patients?
So at least in my practice, I strive or I endeavor never to use that terminology to the best of my ability until I have a relationship with that patient, that they understand that the terminology I'm using is not consistent with their understanding of how their body works. Mm-hmm. Also, to me, I mean, let's be honest, the way the Chinese describe the functions of the organs is really not accurate. It's not to say that what the Chinese were observing wasn't happening. It's that they ascribed a bunch of symptoms to an organ that they knew was important without really knowing what that organ does. And so for me, describing what's going on in somebody's body, for the most part, it doesn't require me to rely on using organ terminology. Mm-hmm. I think it ends up being more accurate and probably fairer to describe it in terms of symptoms alone than it is to say, oh, well, we call this liver qi. Liver qi is shorthand for a bunch of symptoms. And so because we live in a culture which has no idea what liver qi is, it doesn't make sense to use that terminology for the average patient. Mm-hmm. And so I can talk to them about being like, well, this is why you have fullness under the ribs and this is why you're irritable. I can talk about all their symptoms. I can put together herbs to treat all those symptoms, and I never once have to say the liver. Right. Now, it works for me to know what liver qi is and to keep that tucked away in my head. Patients don't need to hear it because it's not relevant to them. What's relevant to them is how they're feeling. And if you can talk to them how they feel, that's golden.
Absolutely. And to let them know that you may be having these symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the organ itself is bad or there's something wrong with it.
Which is why I don't like to use the organ names at all, because that scares people and they don't need to be scared.
Absolutely. So especially in these moments, I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing more anxiety, more worry, more fear. And what are some ways that they can help themselves right now in this time?
Yeah, well, at least from the Western medicine perspective, one of the best ways that you can curtail any kind of anxiety or depression is exercise. In fact, antidepressants only barely outperform exercise, and exercise works that well to help people's anxiety and depression. So if you can get into a regular exercise routine, even though you're sheltering in place, that will go a long, long way to improving your mood. And also ensuring that your diet is good. Now, diet's a difficult issue because in Chinese medicine, we characterize or we understand foods and herbal substances according to how they make you how they change your body temperature and things like that. And so what a lot of people will assume is a healthy diet for everyone may not be a healthy diet for everyone. So I've definitely had patients where they're eating a quote unquote healthy diet, and if anything, it's not doing anything for them. And if at worst, it's actually making them worse. And so diet is something that if you're really going to be like focusing on diet, it's pretty advisable to work with somebody who's really educated in how to work with food, either a Chinese medicine professional or a dietitian or something like that. But that being aside, with diet, the kind of rules of thumb that I operate from and I give all of my patients is eat as many different things as you can and buy the best quality your money can afford. Now, the reason for this is because there's no good and no bad in anything. There's good and bad in everything, really. And so if you eat one calorie source like wheat, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, you're going to get all the benefits that wheat can confer upon you, but you are also going to get the detriments that wheat can confer upon you. Whereas if, Monday you eat wheat and Tuesday you eat rice and Wednesday you eat amaranth and Thursday you eat, quinoa, by varying your calorie sources, you increase the amount of micronutrients you can get, since all of those have different micronutrients in them, and you decrease the risk that any of them will give you. So it's the same with vegetables, with meat, with dairy. By varying up your calorie sources, you decrease the amount of risk and you increase the benefit. So diversity is the most important. But if you're looking to use food as medicine, meaning you're trying to treat something, then you need guidance. You need to have a model that can really explain what's going on with you and how you can then apply specific foods to remedy that situation.
Absolutely. Now, are there any foods particular that you would advise someone who was having anxiety to avoid?
That depends very much on the cause. So sometimes it depends on the type of anxiety even, because, there are different kinds of anxiety. There's anxiety that's characterized by panic attacks with palpitations, shortness of breath. There are forms of anxiety that are racing thoughts and worry. There's anxiety that is very irritable and frustrated and angry. And each of these has a different pathophysiological process taking place in the body, which means then that each of them requires a different intervention. So it really kind of depends on the kind. For the one that seems to be the most ubiquitous in the population, though, is everyone worries. No one can stop thinking. And we say in Chinese medicine that worry, or more particularly overthinking, damages the digestive tract, damages digestion, insofar as it causes the qi to bind or knot up, which means that's those feeling of knots in the solar plexus or knots in the intestines, cramping, discomfort when people get anxious or they get nervous. So foods that are going to be good for the digestive tract to keep things moving are going to be useful to have in those situations. That might be things like citrus, which with its very pungent flavor can help disperse accumulated food or phlegm that might be clogging up the digestive tract. It also means to avoid very heavy, greasy, cloying foods, very overly sweet foods, stuff that would gum up the digestive tract. Now, these are general, yeah?
Sweets, the stuff that we go to when we're worrying and want some comfort, that kind of stuff.
Sure. And the interesting thing is the sweet flavor. Chinese medicine understands the functions of herbs according to their flavor, which makes sense because all flavor is the conversion of a chemical electrical signal from your tongue in your brain as the experience of flavor. And so like when we taste something, there's a little chemical reactions taking place on our tongue that's telling us kind of what is in that product. And so they understood that the sweet flavor causes things to slow down and causes things to mellow out and soften. soothe and relax, which is, it's no wonder then that when we're all really stressed out, we reach for sweet things. It's our body self-soothing, self-medicating, which speaks a lot to how Chinese medicine evolved. Much of Chinese medicine was just elaboration upon what we were already doing instinctually. So sweets are not bad by themselves, but in excess, they start gumming up the digestive tract. In other words, they begin feeding the bacteria cultures in your gut, causing them to proliferate. That will cause abdominal distension and discomfort. And so that all ends up causing your digestive problems. And then as long as those digestive problems are there, it's going to make it even harder for you to settle down and relax.
Right. Now, I wanted to touch on the herbs because you were talking about the flavors and how the different flavors do different things in our bodies. So if people aren't able to have access to acupuncturists, then they can do online consultations over the phone with doctors and get herbs. Can you talk about what the herbs do in the body and how the flavors are helping move those emotions?
Sure, sure. So just like there are 5 primary emotions, there are 5 primary flavors. The Chinese were really into numerology and they really liked the number 5 for whatever reason. And so, I mean, they liked a bunch of numbers, to be honest, but like 5 was one that they really liked. And so each of the emotions has a predictable effect on your metabolism. They say anger causes things to rise. You can imagine them why people get flushed in their face. They get tight shoulders, tight jaw when they're angry. They grit their teeth when they're angry. That's because everything is moving upward. Whereas sorrow causes things to dissipate out, which is why when people are really sad, they're just like this. They can't collect themselves. They're so dissipated from the sorrow and grief that they're experiencing.
Right.
Worry, we already said, causes things to bind in the body. Fright causes it to scatter. So you think of it as like deer in the headlight syndrome. You get so scared you can't collect yourself again to be able to function, so you paralyze and freeze. And joy causes things to relax. So of all your emotions, of course everyone likes the joy, and that's mainly because most of us are too tense all the time. So joy is a nice remedy for that because it causes us to relax. But interestingly, in Chinese medicine, even joy can be pathological if it occurs in excess or occurs too strong over a short period of time. So you then need to pair flavors of your herbs to affect what the emotion is doing physiologically or metabolically in your body. So if things are beginning to bind up, meaning like food is not passing properly. So now you have anxiety, you have generalized anxiety disorder, and every time you eat, it just sits in your stomach. And you're just eating because every time you eat, it just sits there and you feel miserable. And the more miserable you feel, the more anxious you get.
Right.
So with that kind of problem, you want pungent, acrid flavors. This would be, pepper. This would be citrus, as I said earlier, maybe cinnamon. Things in onions, scallion, garlic, all these things. Which is also why in traditional cooking, like with beans, are oftentimes cooked with garlic and onion, because beans have the propensity to cause gas to accumulate in people's bodies, which is uncomfortable. So you put a bunch of garlic, a bunch of onion in there. The pungent flavors of the garlic and onion keep things moving so that the beans don't cause gas to bind up. Now you can use the same thing if somebody is very worrisome and it corresponds with binding that takes place in the guts, for instance. But the only problem here is that foods or medicinal substances, though they have their effects based on their flavors, they have affinities for different parts of your body. So not every pungent herb is going to have an effect on your mind. And not every pungent or acrid herb is going to have an effect on your gut. So knowing which ones do have an effect up here or have an effect down here, or knowing who really needs actually something to disperse their thought process and who actually needs something just to disperse what's going on in their gut, to then secondarily make their mind feel better. That's the art of medicine. And so, at least though, if you're anxious and you get kind of food or water or anything just kind of sits in your belly, then using very pungent flavors that you already use in cooking, just using more of it, that's going to help. If you are having like panic attacks with lots of palpitations, and maybe you can't stay asleep the whole night through, and maybe you wake up with palpitations, which I've definitely had patients like that. This is a problem where you need sour. You need something that's going to hold things in for you, tone things up. And so sour can also be used for somebody who's really depressed too. Because remember, we said with grief and sorrow, with somebody who's really depressed, the chi is dissipated. And so using sour can pull it back in and hold it up for them, for somebody who's kind of dissipated and weak. And so you would think of what sour foods you have access to. Hawthorn berry, maybe. You can lemon, lime, maybe. And then certain berries are sour. And then you start including more of those in your diet just to get that kind of toning quality of sour. And that's pretty much it for the anxiety types. I mean, there are other flavors are going to affect your metabolism in other ways. They're going to affect emotions in other ways. Most people are not looking to treat joy because most people don't have pathological joy, though some people do if you consider something like bipolar disorder, which can have very high peaks where the person is manic and they are extremely joyful. That might be a situation in which you need to control the joy. But that's not something I would recommend, oh, just take sour herbs. For that, you would need to consult me or somebody qualified to treat you. And then for something like fright, you may also use sour for because it's going to pull back in what's been scattered. But fright is usually a short-lived emotion, in which case you don't really need to treat it. Very, very often, you just need to get the person out of the frightful situation, and they should recover. It's more what I find most people to be dealing with is worry, anger, and then some people get like the panic attacks, the kind of frightful panic attacks. And as I already said, with the panic attacks, the sour flavor, which kind of astringes and holds things in place, typically is very helpful. Think of it like, people are really into the weighted blankets.
Yes.
It's the same concept, except internally, inside your body, affecting your organs as opposed to on your muscles. So that comfort that people feel with the weight of the weighted blanket on them, we can approximate that by using sour herbs such as like swanzauren or wuweizi, which you would know.
So I think you touched on it really well. I think the excess emotions that we experience today are fear, worry, and anger. So when we are experiencing these emotions, I will never forget this quote that Dr. Cohen said about the arc of our thoughts, how they're supposed to come in and they're supposed to flow out. But what happens is when we have these excessive thoughts and they're coming in, and they're not leaving, we're not expressing them, we're not moving them out of our body through exercise or qigong, they're kind of just sitting in there. So what would you recommend for people in their thought processes when they are experiencing these emotions that we're going to have because we're human? How can we properly process things through our body so they don't get stuck?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. Now, my expertise is in capital T traditional Chinese medicine. By capital T, I mean rooted in the classic literature. And in that, overwhelmingly, they're going to say that by the time you're having those emotions, something is already wrong. Like you are already sick to be having such intense emotion that you are now miserable because of your emotions. And as they already said, that as I already said earlier when we first began, they thought it's because your organs are already sick. And it's because your organs are not working properly, now you're predisposed to having these emotions. So the first thing I would say from like the Neijing perspective is get get your house in order. Like make sure everything is working properly in here. Make sure your bowel movements are perfect. Make sure your urination is perfect. Make sure uh, your belly is not bloated and distended. Make sure your sleep is good. If all of these are good, more often than not, you are no longer having your emotional problems. Because remember, the reason the emotions suck, we don't like them, is because they hurt. They affect all of our organ systems. So if your organ systems have been normalized or regulated, you're probably not having those emotions anymore, and therefore you're no longer in pain. The other side of that, though, that I see in the old literature is a problem of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So the old literature, especially the old Taoist literature, but also in the Neijing, will say the probably the biggest problem or the biggest cause of emotional distress and therefore by extension poor health, because we know or we've established that your emotions are a function of your organs, is unfulfilled desire, is kind of the like Jin Yuan dynasty way of putting it. And this idea of wanting something to be the other being a way other than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the Taoists, they would say the only way to get around this, there is nothing you can do other than learn what actually is. And so for them, they would say you must cultivate a degree of stillness that is so pure that you are no longer filtering the world through belief systems. You are only seeing the world as it is. And therefore, you will never expect anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And with no more expectations means contentment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the solution they would give. In terms of modern, like for everybody who's not going to shave their heads and become a monk and live in a cave somewhere, like the evidence does suggest that a regular meditation practice is really important, that exercise is really important, the diet is really important, that I do contend and agree with the old literature, which is that if you're already at the point that you're having huge emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that you are already sick and your body's not already not working the way it ought to.
Mm-hmm.
And so figuring out what to do once you're exploding with anger is it's like too late. The Huangdi Neijing has this beautiful quote that says, the treating somebody once they've developed an illness is the equivalent of digging a well once you're already thirsty or trying to forge weapons once the war has already begun. It's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So the time to act for your emotional health is now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's not when you are having an event.
Right.
If you're having an event, then what you're doing is now fighting a physiological process. And so now there are methods, there are tools you can do to interrupt the process,
Mm-hmm.
but by that point, it's already too late. And so yeah, at best you have to wait it out until it calms down, and it will. Emotional explosions and eruptions always do.
Right, right. I think you touched on a good point. Just prevention is everything. So, what is your cultivation? What is your meditation? Are you able to sit and observe the thoughts and observe the emotions as they come up and allow them, to not become so attached to it? Like you said, the desire. When we desire things, it's kind of setting us up for disappointment a lot of the times. So, what I love about Chinese medicine is that we learn what our bodies are actually supposed to be doing. We learn that, oh, loose stools are not normal, or not being able to go to the bathroom every day for most people means you're constipated. And when you're bloating, it's not just because you bloat every time you eat. That means that there's something going on inside your body. So what are some of the physical symptoms that we kind of just live with, not even knowing that, yo, this is your body speaking to you?
Sure. Abdominal distension. Everyone. I got out of 10 people, 9.5 of them have like distension. I mean, I can't say everyone, but like just about every single person I meet has abdominal distension. And that's, everyone thinks they're fat, but I'll tell you that like it's not like what abdominal distension, fat is soft, it's mushy. Like if you're looking down and your belly's round, but if you push on it and it feels like a balloon, that's not fat. Like, that's gas. That's literally gas trapped in your intestines.
Right.
So, or trapped in your stomach. So, like abdominal distension is like almost ubiquitous in the population.
Yeah.
Pasty stools. So these are stools that they're not diarrhea, but they are they're like gluey or pasty. They require more toilet paper to clean up. They leave.
Freak, yeah.
Yeah, that's another one that, I'd probably say 6 or 7 out of 10 people have. Really, really common. It's not life-threatening. And for most people, they don't think twice about it because it doesn't negatively affect them in any way that they can appreciate. And so, but that is an indicator that like your bowel movements are not good. So like when I'm with my patients, I'm like, when I ask them like, how are your bowel movements? And then they'll be like, oh, they're good. And then I'm like, and then I'm like, wait, let's qualify this a little bit. Good means like chocolate covered banana. Good. Like that's good. Like you'll never look at a chocolate covered banana the same way again.
Right.
But that's what your bowel movement should look like.
Right.
So that's another
yeah. I'm normal. I go like every 4 days. I'm like, no.
Straight up. Those would be the biggest ones. Sleep issues. People who can't sleep the whole night through or it takes hours for them to fall asleep. These are very common as well. But they're not so problematic that people often seek out help for them. Mm-hmm. So but those are definitely ones that are indicating things are not working. And then again, any emotional problem. Like if you are living with generalized anxiety disorder, panic attack disorder, social anxiety disorder, if you are quick to anger, irritable all the time, if you rage, I mean, any of these things like that, these emotions are pretty ubiquitous in the population too, and they end up causing people like social distress, like when they're not able to socialize well because they are anxious or because they get angry too easily. But like, remember, to somebody who is basing the way they look at health from the 黄帝内经, like that means that you are already not working properly, and it's not your fault. Let me stop. Like, say really quickly here, saying that the organs are what produce your emotions, I think is really important because it also absolves somebody of the guilt of being as emotional as they are. I know for me, and when I was in my 20s, I had severe anxiety, and part of the problem was that I believed I was responsible for the way I was thinking, and I couldn't control the way I was thinking. That's why I had this disease called anxiety, and I had to learn that I was sick. And like nobody gets mad at you for having diabetes, but they get mad at you for not acting well, and not acting correctly. But you are equally sick when you have those emotional problems that preclude your behavior. So I think it's super important to recognize that your emotions are physical processes, because it says that like you're not to blame for the fact that you can't control it. Like you're sick right now and you need help. And then how you seek out that help's up to you. That can be talk therapy, it could be cognitive behavioral therapy, it could be antidepressants, it could be traditional Chinese medicine. So
right. And I love the mixture of all of it. I love the idea of eating for your body, you know, eating for what your body needs in the moment, consulting someone who is able to help you holistically, you know, an acupuncturist, a homeopath, someone who can really look at your overall. And then also, like, not blaming yourself, like you said. You know, if you are consistently frustrated, or, you know, the slightest things make you mad or angry, you know, there's a reason for that. It's not that you're an angry person, like you said. You know, this really, really gives us the power to take a look at ourselves and not stay in that victim mentality. Like, I'm just an angry person, or I'm just a really sad person, or I'm just a worry wart. You know, it's like that is part of our predisposition. Some of us are more prone to be warriors. Some of us are more prone to be angry, but it doesn't mean that's who you are. And I love the empowerment aspect, because to me, knowledge is power. Like, if I
Sure.
understand how my body works, then it helps me understand my emotions and how they are part of it, but it's not who I am.
Sure. I think what's another really important thing to take from emotions being physical entities or physical processes is that, this is really useful when dealing with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
because people will endure really horrible things in their lives, which have enduring effects upon throughout the rest of their life. And these effects oftentimes take physical manifestations that severe digestive issues, gynecological issues,
Mm-hmm.
emotional issues, all of these things that are sequelae to whatever traumatic event they endured. And by like the person who has endured the traumatic experience can be fine, and then a trigger appears, and everything just goes crazy, and they know that, like, they shouldn't be feeling this way. They know that the situation does not warrant this reaction, but
Mm-hmm.
they can't control it because emotions are physiological processes. So the nice thing about recognizing it as such and then addressing it as such, especially with the Chinese model, which kind of distributes your emotional life throughout your entire body, we can intervene using physical interventions such as acupuncture or chemical interventions such as herbs to begin making it easier for you to cope with your trauma. I've even helped people get off psychiatric medications. I had a domestic abuse survivor that I helped get off medications by using herbs. It's totally doable. It just requires broadening your perspective on emotions as not just being thoughts, not just being beliefs, that these are chemical processes that are taking place throughout your entire body, that your entire body has to come together to produce them. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you can then begin regulating each part of that process that isn't working properly, meaning making their sleep better or making their digestion better, that goes a really long way to settling down the psychological manifestation of that, which is then the emotional triggers that they have.
Right. I love how you touched on it's something that's actually in the body. So what we know about somatics is that when we experience a trauma or something, it goes inside of our body and it stays there. So unless we move it out or we are conscious of it through some type of therapy, then it's still going to be there. So what I really love about acupuncture is that we're able to access those emotions within our body and help move the energy of it. And I think that that is so important and so potent, because we could sit and talk therapy all day, you know, and it still may not even be able to get to the real source of it and actually move it energetically through our body. So it brings me back to the point of having a mixture of things that we go to, not only food, but possibly verbalizing it with a talk therapist, but then also somatically getting it out of our body through acupuncture, movement, qigong, those type of things. So it's really a very, very holistic view of how we need to look at these emotions and how it plays a part in our bodies.
Sure.
Um, I would love, before we end, to close on possibly like a patient that you were able to help. You touched on the domestic abuse. patient. And I think that would be a great one, unless you have another one that you think is a better one.
I have a really cool, I mean, the domestic abuse one was great. I have a really cool one just to show how neat Chinese medicine can be. I had a friend of mine contact me saying that he had mixed substances the night before and he couldn't sleep all night long because of it. And then he was in like massive panic attack like the whole day the next day. And he called me. I went and collected him. And when I saw him, he's like, I'm burning up, and his face is all flushed, and he's taking a bottle of water. He's literally splashing water all over himself, frantically trying to cool down because he's so hot and so anxious. Mm-hmm. And he grabs my hand, he says, see, and he puts my hand against his head. And the first thing I noticed was like his hand was really cold and his head was cold. And I thought, well, you know, he was splashing cold water on his face. Maybe that's what it was. So I take him home, and I gave him a single herb to try and just get the heat to come down, because for him the anxiety was a lot of heat rushing up this way, which is why he was complaining, I'm hot, and his face is all red. So to try to get the heat to come down, so I gave him Juhua chrysanthemum tea, try and just get the heat to go down. He couldn't even take a sip of it. It was so disgusting to him. And I was like, that's telling. When someone has a massive aversion to something as benign as chrysanthemum, like, that's telling. So I said, okay, I need to check your feet. So he took his shoes off, and I touched his feet. His feet were ice cold. Ice cold. Here he's complaining about being hot, and he's flushed up here, and his feet are freezing. So I said, I know what to do. There's a passage in the Mawang Dui manuscripts to talk about exactly what to do in this situation. And so I grab a stick of moxa, I ignite that, so it's emitting heat. I go to kidney one at the bottom of his foot, and like heating up his feet. And I said, okay, I want you to let me know when your foot gets warm, because the feet are so cold. I want his foot to warm up. And so once the first foot warmed up, I went to the second, and I warmed up the second. And when the second foot warmed up and both his feet were warm, his whole body went like this, and he passed out for like an hour or 2 hours. And this is amazing, because this was an understanding of how Chinese medicine looks at heat and cold in a person's body. He had too much heat up here, too much yin down here, or cold down here. Yin and yang were separating. And so I tried to force the yang down with a little bit of like cool chrysanthemum or something, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was actually cold yin preventing the hot yang from being able to descend. And so by warming his feet, the yang could come back down. And so it was so exquisitely like picturesque for Chinese medicine. I just love that story. And it was like one of those moments in my life where I was like, oh yeah, what I chose to study is just the coolest thing ever.
I love moments like that. That's a perfect description of how something so simple, so easy can affect our mental so quickly.
And he's prone to like that kind of anxiety. And he knows now that if he's starting to feel really anxious and his feet are cold, he goes and he soaks his feet in hot water to calm himself down.
Yep. Okay, that is a tip that we can give everyone. When you're feeling anxious, put your feet in some warm hot water.
If your feet are cold, it doesn't work if your feet are hot.
Right. It has to have the yang up top and the cold on the bottom.
Yeah. So it needs to be icy feet. If your anxiety with icy feet, definitely can like soak your feet in hot water, calm you down.
That's your go-to. Oh my god. But
that's the difficulty with medicine. Is like medicine, it's a science, and so like it's hard for me to give like, oh, just do this, because it's not that simple. It worked for him because that was exactly what was happening in his body, but it won't work for every anxiety case. So.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of Chinese medicine. There is no one thing for everyone. And that's why it's such a special, special medicine when you are the patient, because it's just for you. You know, the acupuncturist really digs into what's really truly happening in all areas of your life. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this. I learned, and I hope everyone who joined in learned a little bit as well. Your expertise shows, so thank you for sharing with us. Everyone who is interested in learning more about emotions and TCM or getting a consultation from Lauren, please reach out to him. I will put his information on my Instagram, and you can see it's linked on there as well. And hopefully we'll be having more conversations like these. I'm so appreciative of you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, V.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'll talk to y'all soon. Mwah.
Bye.
Bye.